The President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, made a series of loud statements in a recent interview and, for example, answered the question of whether he plans to run for a third presidential term. His answer will definitely surprise you. Trump also made several remarks about Russia's war against Ukraine. He believes that there is a good chance to reach a peace agreement in the near future. Otherwise, he will simply walk out of these negotiations and say that, quoting Trump, both sides are fools and idiots, so let them sort it out themselves. Trump spoke about Canada and Greenland and somewhat softened his position regarding Canada. But he still added that, of course, for now, he does not intend to use troops to seize these territories. But at the same time, he does not rule out the use of military force for a takeover, for example, of Greenland. Well, regarding the 51st state, Canada, as he calls it, Trump also made a very, very important remark. We will pay attention to it with you today. Therefore, today we will analyze this interview with Donald Trump, where he said a lot of things. In particular, he also talked about negotiations with Iran regarding the nuclear program. We will also pay attention to this with you. And in addition, Trump also said a lot about tariffs against China. In general, in this episode, we will fully analyze the key loud statements of Donald Trump in his latest interview. My name is Alexei Pechi. Today is May 4th on the calendar. Let's go over everything in order. I'll start with the issue of Ukraine and Russia. President Donald Trump stated that the United States is now close to one side, but not as much as with the other, regarding a peace agreement for Ukraine. The American leader did not specify which side he was particularly close to, but nevertheless says that now there is a good chance to reach a peace agreement. If it fails, he suggests letting them resolve it on their own while we pull out of the talks completely. Trump admitted that there might come a time when he says, quote, "All right, go ahead, keep going, keep being foolish." Next, I will quote Donald Trump verbatim. "It may be impossible to reach a peaceful agreement. Impossible. There is tremendous hatred. We're talking about tremendous hatred between these two men, meaning Zelensky and Putin, and between, some of the soldiers. Frankly speaking, between the generals. They have been fiercely fighting for 3 years now. Let me remind you, Trump is 11 years old. I think we have a very good chance to do this. But what is meant is to conclude a peace agreement, although Trump admits that most likely it will not be possible to do this in the near future. Next, we move to another question that interests us: whether Donald Trump will run for a third presidential term. In 2018, there were a lot of rumors and manipulations around this topic. And in an interview, President Donald Trump makes it clear that he will leave the White House at the end of his second term without trying to extend his stay. And indeed, he will not run for a third term. But at the same time, Trump highlighted several other rising stars of the Republican Party who, according to him, are capable of taking on the leadership of Make America Great Again, after Trump, finishes his activity as the elected leader of the Republican Party. Who do you think it is? And here's where it gets interesting. It's Vice President Juris Dr. Vance. I remind you, that's already happened. There have already been rumors that they might pull off a scheme where Juris Dr. Vance will run for president in 2028, and Trump will be his vice president. Then, when J.D. Vance is elected, he can resign from the presidency at any moment, and those powers would go to Donald Trump as vice president. But there is another person he mentioned, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State of the United States of America. And Trump says that it's either J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio. He says these are the two pillars who can take on the leadership of Make America Great Again. Next is a quote from Trump: "I will be president for 8 years. I will be president for 2 terms. I have always thought that this is very, very important." Earlier, let me remind you, Trump said back in March that he was not joking about considering a third term. And he said again in his latest interview that he received persistent requests from allies to run again. But, they say, despite these requests, Trump said that he is aware of the reality standing in the way. Quote, "Yeah, well, this is something that, as far as I know, you're not allowed to do. I don't know if it's constitutional that they don't allow you to do this or something else." Well, hinting that unfortunately the Constitution doesn't give me the opportunity to run for a third term. That's why, well, maybe I would have run, but I can't. But here I would add that the 22nd Amendment to the United States Constitution states that no person can be elected to the office of president more than twice. Amending the Constitution to remove this restriction would be extremely difficult and would require the support of either 2/3 of the House of Representatives and the Senate, or 2/3 of the state legislatures. Both options would then require ratification by 3/4 of the states. Well, here, Representative Andy Ogles is a Republican from Tennessee. In January, he introduced a joint resolution in the House of Representatives aimed at amending the Constitution to allow the president to be elected for up to 3 terms. This is a legislative initiative that has not yet gained widespread support. Democratic Party Representative Den Goldman, who was the lead attorney during Trump's first impeachment, introduced a resolution in response calling on his colleagues to reaffirm the ban. 22 amendments regarding the 3rd term. So you need to understand that Republicans, some of whom are trying to push the idea to vote and remove this amendment, Democrats are saying no, it needs to be explicitly reaffirmed again. Trump said in an interview that he did not have any official meetings specifically dedicated to determining a path to a 3rd term. But he has heard different concepts about possible options, including a legally questionable strategy in which Jay Divins would run for president, Donald Trump would be his vice president, and then, once Jay Divins is elected, he would simply hand over the role of United States President to Donald Trump. So accordingly, this scheme is already being considered. And Trump says, well, listen, I don't quite understand how this would work. I still want to serve 2 terms, and that's it. Talks about a possible 3rd term for Donald Trump reached their peak last month after the Trump Organization, partially headed by the president's 2 adult sons, began selling red caps with the Trump logo. 2,028 caps were sold at a price of $50 each, with the description, "The future looks bright. Rewrite the rules with the 2028 cap with a high crown." Despite this description and its obvious hint at rewriting the rules, Trump stated that his ultimate goal is to pass the baton before the next presidential election. Next is his quote. Trump says, "Many are selling 2028 caps, but that's not what I want. I want to spend 4 wonderful years and then pass this on to someone, ideally a great Republican, so that he can move things forward." Well, I'll repeat myself once again. Among the stars of the Republican Party who, according to Trump, can take over the management of the Make America Great Again brand, which he called the greatest political movement in history. This is J.D. Vance, who, according to Trump, will likely have an advantage over other competitors in the Republican primaries for the top position. And a journalist asked if Vance would be at the top of the list as his successor. Trump, in response, praised J.D. Vance but did not take on any obligations to answer that question. He replied, "Yes, that's quite possible. I don't want to get involved in that, and I think he's a fantastic, brilliant guy. Mark Rubio is also great. There are many great ones among them." Trump also emphasized that such discussions are still too premature. Quote, "Well, of course, you could say that if someone is the vice president and that person is outstanding, I suppose they would have an advantage." Next, Trump refused to give his endorsement or call Vance his chosen successor, while continuing to shower him with praise for his work. But let me remind you, back in February, Trump said in an interview that Vance is very capable, but that he doesn't necessarily consider jurist Dr. Vance as his successor. In addition, Trump also called Marco Rubio a great potential leader of the Republican Party. This confidence Trump has in the former senator from Florida is reflected in Rubio's broad portfolio in the president's administration. In particular, Trump appointed him as acting head of the National Archives, acting administrator of the United States Agency for International Development, and most recently as National Security Advisor, replacing Mike Waltz, whom Trump, according to his words, will appoint as ambassador to the United Nations. So right now, Marco Rubio has a whole package of powers there that he's dealing with. He currently serves as both the United States Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, among the top positions. Well, in history, probably in modern history, only Henry Kissinger held both of those positions at the same time. And so, according to some Republicans, this is an excellent strategy that should be maintained. In addition, in the interview, Trump also talked a lot about Canada and Greenland. And here we also have something to pay attention to. In particular, President Donald Trump does not completely rule out the use of force in an attempt to annex Greenland and Canada. But he said that the prospect of attacking Canada seems extremely unlikely, while Greenland, according to him, is a completely different case that should be viewed differently. Interestingly, when he was asked, So what about Greenland? Will you use military force to seize Greenland? Trump said, I'm not ruling it out. I'm not saying I'm going to do it, but I'm not ruling anything out. No, definitely not there. We really need Greenland. Greenland has a very small population, and we will take care of them. We will cherish them and all that. But we need it for international security. Let me remind you that after his November elections, President Trump did not hide his desire to acquire Greenland. As he stated, we need it, we must have it. He said this back in March. In the same month, White House officials led by United States Vice President J.D. Vance visited the United States Space Force Base on the island of Greenland, which can boast significant mineral reserves and a strategic location in the Arctic. A similar story happened with Canada. The United States president often thought about turning the country into the 51st state of the United States. Trump's fixation was a real thing. This was warned about by former Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. As Trump said in a recent interview, quote, I don't see that with regard to Canada. I just don't see it. I have to be honest with you. He means an attack on the country, but nevertheless, in Canada, all these attacks by Donald Trump did not go unnoticed. As you know, in the recent snap parliamentary elections, the Liberals won, and the Liberal Party candidate Mark Carney still secured the majority, and now he will be the next Prime Minister of Canada. And here is what he says next. These are not empty threats. President Trump is trying to break us so that America can control us. That will never happen. But we also have to acknowledge the reality that our world has changed dramatically. Trump downplayed the idea of using force against Canada in his conversation with Yolker. In an interview for No, he said that he would raise the issue of unification with the new Prime Minister Carney. Quote, I will always talk about this, says Trump. Do you know why we subsidize Canada for $200 billion a year? We don't need their cars, actually. We don't need their cars. We don't need their energy. We don't even need their energy. You know, we have more of it than they do. Trump's statement about subsidizing in the amount of $200 billion. This is partly based on the trade deficit between the United States and Canada. And it is, of course, completely unfounded because subsidizing and trade deficit are absolutely different things. But Trump keeps referring to this number when discussing the two countries. What did Trump say next? Quote, if you look at our map, if you look at the geography, and deep down I'm a realtor when I look at this, without this artificial line, which was drawn with a ruler many years ago, it was just an artificial line going straight through our territory. You can't even imagine what a wonderful country this would have been. It would have been great. Well, what I mean is this line is the border between Canada and the United States of America, which should be completely erased and abandoned. Besides that, Trump also commented on the nuclear deal with Iran. Trump stated that the goal of his administration's nuclear negotiations with Iran is to achieve the complete dismantling of Tehran's nuclear program. But Trump is still open to allowing the Islamic Republic to develop peaceful nuclear energy. And this, of course, is very bad news for Israel. As Trump said, I think I was open to this. Civilian energy often leads to wars, and we don't want them to have nuclear weapons. This is a very simple deal. That is, on the one hand, Trump admits that yes, essentially, Iran can keep its peaceful nuclear program. This could at any moment lead to them eventually reaching a certain level of uranium enrichment and creating nuclear weapons. That's why Israel demands the total destruction of Iran's nuclear program. Donald Trump himself insisted on this just a couple of months ago. But now, when direct negotiations are underway between Iran and the United States on the nuclear program, suddenly Americans start thinking that, in principle, it might be possible to preserve that so-called civilian nuclear energy, as they call it. And then it's absolutely no different from the deal that was made in 2015 by Barack Obama, which Donald Trump withdrew from in 2018. That is, it's simply a rewriting of that same deal all over again. Nothing will change. Iran will keep its peaceful nuclear program and will simply promise that they won't create any nuclear weapons. That's why here I think Trump is backing down a little bit. There was also a statement made regarding the trade war by Donald Trump. Trump stated that he needs to keep at least some tariffs on foreign goods in order to convince companies to move production to the United States. This suggests that historically tariffs on almost all goods imported into America will remain in one form or another, even despite the White House's statement about its intention to conclude a trade agreement with a number of countries, including China. Nevertheless, Trump has already announced that he will soon begin reducing tariffs against China, admitting that the 145% tariffs that were previously imposed have actually stopped trade between the United States and China, and this is unacceptable. And Trump is already saying that we want to negotiate with the Chinese, so we are waiting for the Chinese to respond to our call for negotiations, and then we will reduce these tariffs. But remember, recently Trump said that even before negotiations begin, they are ready to reduce tariffs to around 55–65%. In general, these are the main points of Donald Trump on foreign policy in the interview for. Write your opinion and your conclusions about these statements in the comments. Subscribe to the channel, click the bell, and don't forget to like. If you want to support the work of this channel, scan the quick response code on your screens. This is the platform. The easiest and most convenient way to support the work of this channel is with your donation. I will be grateful, that's all. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.